Get ready for a chilling lineup of true demonic encounters horror stories. Stories that'll make you think twice before messing with the unknown. Real accounts of evil presences, dark rituals, and apparitions that defy any logical explanation. Like the one you're about to hear, where a simple comment about the devil brought something sinister creeping into a dark bedroom. And regret came far too late. But before we dive into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The first weird thing happened even before we got to the cabin. Jake swore the path was down a dirt road to the left of the highway, but when we passed the spot he had marked on the GPS, there was absolutely nothing there. Just dense foliage on both sides and a silence so profound that even the sound of the engine felt invasive. We had to turn back about 3 miles, retrace our steps, and only then did the entrance appear, as if it had been hiding from us before. It was subtle, but the kind of thing you feel more than understand. A strange energy, as if the place wasn't ready to receive anyone. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere. No electricity, no cell service, and the water came straight from an old well that made eerie noises every time someone turned the crank. It was the kind of place that, under different circumstances, would have been perfect for disconnecting from the world. But that weekend, something in the air made everything feel heavy, as if the forest had eyes. At first, I tried to ignore it. The cabin was simple but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen with a wood stove, and that smell of aged wood that only old places have. Jake was excited. He said he needed a few days away from everything, that the city was draining his energy. I agreed to go mostly to support him. He was going through a recent breakup, and I thought the isolation might do him some good. But as soon as we finished unloading our stuff, it started getting cold, and we realized the firewood inside wasn't going to last the whole night. The plan was to light the fireplace soon, but without enough fuel, we went looking for more in the forest. We grabbed some lanterns, backpacks, and followed a thin trail that gradually faded as the brush took over. The silence there was different. It wasn't the natural silence of a forest, with the sound of wind, breaking branches, insects. It was a full silence. Dense, as if something was listening but hiding. After walking aimlessly for about 20 minutes, straying further than we should have, we came face to face with a structure in the middle of the trees. A small old house with the roof caving in on one side and windows boarded up. It was impossible for anyone to live there, but it also seemed like no one had the courage to tear it down. Jake wanted to go in. I was against it, of course, but he was already at the door, pushing it slowly. And before I could say anything, the creak of the old wood spread through the forest. The door opened by itself. The wood seemed to have absorbed years of moisture and abandonment. The air inside was cold, still, and had a strong smell of something that had rotted and been forgotten for too long. We walked slowly through the rooms, not saying a word. There were overturned furniture, broken bottles on the floor, candle remnants scattered around, and strange marks on the walls. Symbols, lots of them. They looked drawn with something thick, almost black. It wasn't paint. Jake took a photo, but his phone froze right after. The image never appeared in the gallery. In the corner of the room, we found a staircase leading down to what seemed like a basement. It was narrow, with wet stone steps covered in slime. The lantern trembled in my hand, but still, we went down. What was down there? Well, it's the kind of thing you never forget. In the center of the basement, someone had set up a circle with candles. There was still melted wax on the floor and small bones scattered around. The central symbol looked like a mix of a star and a spiral, and in the middle of it, an object covered with dark red cloth. Jake went over, reached out to touch it. I screamed at him, told him to stop. At that moment, the temperature dropped. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. And then, we heard it. A scratching noise. Coming from beneath the stairs we had descended. The lantern light flickered, and for a fraction of a second, we saw something move in the corner. A tall figure, very tall, almost touching the ceiling. It stood in the shadows, but the eyes, The eyes glowed an intense red, like embers, and I swear I felt it staring at me. Not just seeing, scanning me from the inside. A spiritual presence so intense that the air seemed to push my chest back. Jake froze. I pulled him by the arm, and we ran up the stairs. All the candles went out at the same time, and before we left the house, we heard a deep, hoarse sound that seemed to come from all directions. Something between a whisper and a growl, impossible to understand but full of hatred. The forest was no longer quiet. It was alive, filled with a negative energy that seemed to vibrate in the trees, the ground, our skin. We ran. Without looking back, just ran. When the cabin finally appeared among the trunks, it seemed smaller, darker, but at least it was a place to lock ourselves in. We entered, locked all the doors and piled chairs against the entrance. We stayed silent. The only sound was our heavy breathing. But the night was just beginning. We tried to pretend everything was fine, that what we saw in the basement was just shadows, a suggestion of our minds after a tiring day, influenced by the strange place. But deep down, we knew. We knew there was something wrong in that forest, something that didn't want us there. The fireplace burned weakly with the last bits of firewood we could gather. The light danced on the wooden walls of the cabin and created shadows that moved as if they were alive. Jake was trembling, not just from the cold. He hadn't said a word since we got back, just stared at the floor, eyes glazed, hand gripping his arm as if trying to stay awake. I wanted to talk, break that tense silence, but the words stuck in my throat. Any louder sound seemed like it would call it back. That's when we started to hear it. Footsteps outside the cabin. At first, I thought it was an animal, but it wasn't. They were heavy, dragging footsteps, one at a time, as if something very large and very slow was walking in circles around the house. I looked out the window, but all I could see was the pitch black of the forest. Not even the moonlight penetrated that darkness. But the feeling of being watched grew even stronger. It was as if something was there, waiting. The footsteps stopped. There was a silence so deep, you could hear the creak of the wood contracting in the cold. Jake whispered that he could hear heavy breathing very close to the wall, and before I could respond, the doorknob began to turn slowly. I froze. The door didn't open. The lock held. But the force behind it was real. The wood creaked. The chairs scraped slowly with the pushes. And then everything stopped, as if it knew we were waiting, that we were too terrified to move. We ran to the bedroom, closed the door, and pushed the dresser against it. We stayed there in the dark, not turning on the lantern, only with the sound of our hearts beating loudly. And then, as if it wasn't enough, it came in, not through the door, but it appeared at the end of the hallway, a huge, dark silhouette, almost solid, with the same red eyes from the basement. They glowed in the dark like beacons from hell. It stood there for a few seconds, just looking. And that's when I realized it had no face, just a dense shadow with no defined shape that seemed to absorb the little light in the room. I screamed. Jake forced the window open, and without thinking twice, we jumped. 6 feet high. We landed in the snow and ran through the woods, grabbing nothing. No coats, phones, not even our backpacks. Just pure survival instinct. The forest seemed endless. The trail we followed earlier had simply vanished. Everything was the same. Twisted trunks, branches grabbing our clothes, and that sound. The sound of something big coming right behind us. Heavy breathing, breaking branches, the wind blowing in a way that seemed to whisper our names. But after a while, I don't know how long, the road appeared again, as if it had emerged out of nowhere. A straight cut in the middle of that chaos. And there was the car, closed, covered in ice but intact. We got in. Jake turned the key with a trembling hand. The engine took a while to start. Each second felt like an eternity. When the car finally moved, no one said a word. The only thing we could do was stare fixedly at the road, expecting to see those red eyes appearing in the rearview mirror. The drive back was silent, not for lack of things to say, but because any word seemed to open a door to remembering what we saw. what we felt. A supernatural experience so intense it seemed to have stuck to our skin. For weeks I still woke up with the smell of that house in my nose and the sound of those footsteps echoing in my ears. We never went back there. Jake sold the cabin soon after. No one asked to whom. And even after years, we avoid talking about it. We just look at each other from time to time with that look of those who have shared something no one else would believe. I still don't know what that was. If it was a spirit, a demon, an ancient entity forgotten in the middle of the forest. Maybe it was just a creature that never wanted to be found. But whatever it was, it stayed there. And it's still there. And if by chance one day you find yourself walking on a trail and feel a presence watching you, listen to your instinct. Turn back. Get out of there before it's too late. Creepy, right? What did you think of that story? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. They made it out of the forest alive, but what they saw there has haunted them ever since. Sometimes evil doesn't need an ancient ritual to show itself. Like in the next story, where just a single glance in an ordinary place was enough to freeze the blood in their veins. It was unusually hot for November. The sky was clear, the sun blazing, and that muggy heat clung to my skin as if summer had arrived early. I had left work earlier that day to run some errands downtown. Nothing major. The bank, the pharmacy, and of course, a coffee stop to shake off the accumulated fatigue of the week. I walked into Starbucks more out of a need to slow down than for the iced tea I ordered. The place was cool, with that fresh ground coffee scent, soft background music, and people glued to their phones as usual. I grabbed my order and sat at a small table by the window. The sunlight outside was intense, creating a strange contrast with the comfortable dimness inside. I took off my bag, tossed it onto the chair, and started organizing my things: wallet, keys, phone. All on autopilot. That's when I felt it. You know that sensation of being watched? But it wasn't just a curious or distracted glance. It was something denser, as if an invisible presence had latched onto me. I slowly lifted my eyes, not wanting to seem paranoid. I looked around, people chatting, a guy typing on his laptop, a young woman with a sleeping baby in her arms. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until my eyes met his. He was standing near the door, as if he had just walked in, or was still deciding whether to order something. Simple clothes, dark jeans, a black t-shirt, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Black hair slicked back, olive skin, an ordinary appearance. But his eyes weren't normal. They weren't brown or black. They were completely black. No whites, no shine. A total abyss. And when our gazes locked, it wasn't like meeting a stranger's eyes on the street. It was like falling into an icy hole in the middle of my chest. It seemed like he knew exactly who I was, and worse, it seemed like he had been waiting for me. In that instant, time seemed to stretch. Everything around me continued normally, but between him and me, something was happening. I can't explain it exactly. It was as if a silent conversation had begun. A tension, a challenge, as if he were saying without moving his lips, "You see me? And now?" I felt a negative energy envelop me. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was something more primal, more ancient. As if my body recognized that what stood before me wasn't human. A dense, malicious spiritual presence. As if something ancient and wrong had disguised itself as a person and entered that cafe just to find me. I swallowed hard but didn't look away. I felt that if I broke the contact in any way, I would show weakness. So I responded in my mind, as if protecting myself with the only weapon I had. "I'm leaving. You have no power over me." And that's when things changed. He didn't move, but he seemed satisfied. As if he had heard what I said. As if he were testing my limits. The sensation of being watched intensified. As if I had turned on a beacon in a dark field. And now, whatever was hidden could finally see me back. I looked down at my hands and tried to act naturally. I gathered my wallet, keys, and stuffed everything into my bag without even checking if it was right. I stood up, looked at him one more time. He was still there, motionless, staring at me, and slowly walked out. I walked without haste, without running, without showing fear. It was almost as if my body knew that any sign of panic could be a mistake. As I passed through the glass door, I felt the sun's warmth on my face again, a strange contrast between the bright day and that shadow that seemed to have clung to me. I knew he was still watching me. I didn't need to look back to be sure. It was as if his eyes had left a mark on my skin. I kept walking until I turned the corner. Only then did I take a deep breath. But that feeling of having been touched by something that shouldn't be in this world, it didn't go away. Not at that moment. Not that night, not in the following days, because after that encounter, everything changed. Deep down, I knew it hadn't been a misunderstanding or a hallucination. It was a warning, a reminder. We go through life thinking we understand the world, that everything can be explained, measured, labeled. But there are things, there are presences, that completely escape our logic. And when they decide to look straight at you, there's no way to pretend they don't exist. You feel it. You know, and on that day, in a simple cafe with the sun shining outside, I knew. I got to my car almost on autopilot. You know when you do everything by reflex, but your mind is somewhere else? I opened the door, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, and sat down. I closed the door slowly, as if the world outside were still contaminated by that presence. I started the car but stayed there, with my hand on the gear shift and my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. There was no one. No strange movements. The guy hadn't followed me, but the sensation, that feeling of being watched, wouldn't go away. It was as if he had left something stuck to me. A shadow. I don't know. A heavy energy. As if the air had become thicker, harder to breathe. I tried not to think about it on my way home, but at every traffic light, every corner, every car that passed by, I looked again, thinking I might see those eyes following me. I arrived, parked in my usual spot, and when I entered my apartment, I closed the door as if trying to seal an invisible boundary. The problem was that it wasn't the outside that worried me anymore. It was what I had brought with me. That night, the feeling of being watched came back strongly. I tried to distract myself. I put on some random series, played with my phone, left all the lights on, even the hallway lamp that I never used. But even so, I couldn't relax. Every now and then I would turn my head quickly, swearing I had seen something in the corner of my eye. A shadow, a figure, always out of focus, always there. I went to bed late, and even then, I didn't really sleep. I kept turning in bed covered up to my neck, with my heart racing and my breath shallow. I kept waking up with the impression that someone was standing at my bedroom door. I didn't hear anything, but I felt it. It was as if the air had weight, as if something ancient and dark were pressed against me, lurking. In the following days, things didn't get better. On the contrary, I started dreaming about him. Always the same eyes. Always that direct, deep gaze, as if trying to dig something out of me. He never spoke. He just stared. Sometimes in the dream, he was standing in Starbucks. Other times in my bedroom. Once, I saw him standing at the end of the hallway in my building. Motionless, just watching. And when I woke up, I felt such a strong chill down my spine that it took a while to breathe normally again. And then the noises started. The closet door moving by itself, a drip that had never existed before starting to leak in the middle of the night. Cracks in the wall, in the ceiling. One day, I woke up to the TV turned on mute, with the screen all white. I'm sure I turned it off before going to bed. I always check that. I reached a point where I stopped trying to rationalize. I knew I had brought something with me. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an ordinary spirit. It was something else. A more ancient, more intelligent type of spiritual presence. A cold, calculated malice that wasn't in a hurry. It didn't want to scare me all at once. It wanted to approach slowly, to create space, to make a home. I sought help. I prayed. Did cleansing prayers, used rue, coarse salt in the corners of the house, incense. I even left a glass of water with a lit candle beside it, but nothing made a difference. The atmosphere of the place remained heavy, A friend recommended a woman who performed spiritual cleansings. I went. She looked at me for a few seconds and said, without me explaining anything, "You crossed paths with something that doesn't belong here." At that moment, my throat tightened. She said it wasn't a lost spirit. It was an entity, something ancient, a type of force that manifests in specific places and moments, and that, for some reason, on that day, in that place, it chose me. She said it wasn't by chance. That sometimes these presences appear when we are more vulnerable, more open. And that at that moment, for some reason I can't even explain, I was. I did the cleansing, followed the advice, changed habits, even took a different route to work. I avoided passing by that Starbucks. But the truth is that even with time, even as the silence slowly returned, I was never the same again. Because that feeling of being watched never truly went away. It just became more subtle, as if it had retreated but not left, as if it were still nearby, waiting. And today, every time I enter a crowded place, every cafe, every bakery, every busy spot, I look, I search. Not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. Because now I know, we are not alone in this world. And sometimes what watches you doesn't just want to see you, it wants to enter. And when it enters, it never leaves. Scary, huh? Some encounters seem small, until you realize you've just witnessed something that doesn't belong to this world. But there are entire places swallowed by that same darkness, like the house you're about to step into, where something inhuman lurked behind closed doors. It was as if that house called out to me by name every time I walked past it. The Holland House sat at the end of a forgotten street downtown, well hidden among dry trees and a wall covered in ivy. There was no sign, no number, nothing. Just that rusty gate that creaked with the wind, and you could almost imagine the sound going straight to your bones. People who lived nearby said it was cursed, that it carried some ancient negative energy, something heavy. But honestly, I didn't pay much attention. I thought it was just an exaggeration from people who watched too many movies or needed something to talk about in the grocery line. That afternoon, I was coming back from work later than usual, tired, my head full. I took a different path to cut through and passed by the house again. But this time, it was different. The gate was slightly open, something I had never seen before. And that's when I felt a strange impulse, part curiosity, part recklessness. I stopped. I stared at the entrance. It was as if someone had left it open just for me. I swear I felt a chill down my spine, but instead of leaving, I took a step forward. The feeling of being watched started right there. The street was too silent. No wind, no cars, nothing. And the air seemed denser near the gate, as if the atmosphere changed once you crossed that line. I pushed gently. The old iron groaned loudly, and I entered. The garden was just weeds and dry earth. Some broken angel statues were scattered on the ground as if they had been thrown there. In the back, you could see the house's windows all closed, with peeling paint and rotten wood, but still, it seemed like someone lived there. That made me even more uncomfortable, but at the same time, curious. I climbed the porch steps, and the front door was wide open. No lock, no chain. It was as if the house wanted me to enter, and I did. The smell of mold and old wood filled the air, but the inside of the house was more intact than I expected. Old furniture was still there, covered with white sheets, as if someone had left in a hurry. I walked slowly, looking at every detail. The floor creaked under my feet, and the silence was so absolute that the sound of my breathing seemed too loud. I entered the living room, then a narrow hallway with mirrors on the walls. I felt watched again, but now more intensely. It was as if the reflection in the mirror had a slight delay, a fraction of a second out of time. I looked at myself, but it seemed like there was something behind me, mimicking me, or waiting. I decided to continue anyway. At the back of the house, I found a dark wooden door, different from the others. The frame was covered in marks and scribbles, as if someone had tried to erase something. But what really caught my attention was a number carefully carved near the hinges. 6666. I stood there for a while, looking at it. I knew what that number meant, and yet my hand reached for the doorknob on its own. But I didn't go in. Not yet. I stepped back, unsettled, and went to the kitchen. It was the only room that seemed normal. The table in the corner still had an old cloth, a kettle on the stove, and chairs lined up as if someone was still going to sit there any moment. I sat down in one of them. I needed to breathe, to think about what I was doing there. Maybe it was just an abandoned house, maybe the number on that door was just a coincidence. But the bad feeling wouldn't go away. I was alone, but it didn't feel like it. That's when I heard it. A deep muffled sound, a growl. I looked around, my heart racing. The sound came from upstairs, or maybe the basement, hard to tell. I stayed still for a few seconds, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. Tried to convince myself it was all in my head. A pipe, the wind, any stupid explanation. I stood up and headed toward the front door. But halfway there, the sound came back. Louder. Closer. A continuous growl, filled with anger, as if something was holding its breath on purpose. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, half hidden by the shadows, there was a figure. Tall, with a head that looked like a dog's but deformed, full of scars. It had horns. And the eyes. They were two black holes shining in the dark. I froze. The creature didn't move, just stared at me. The growling sound came from it. The spiritual presence was so intense it felt like the air was being sucked away. Suddenly, it took a step. The wood cracked, and that snapped me out of my trance. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. I stumbled through the room, opened the back door without looking back. I went straight into the backyard and kept running, not even knowing where. When I stopped outside the wall, my lungs burned and my legs trembled. I looked back, trying to understand what had happened. That's when I saw something on the ground near the back door. A dog skeleton, whole, with its paws turned up, and next to it, a footprint. Huge, deep, with claws. It was at that moment a taxi passed by on the street and I almost threw myself in front of it. I got in, slamming the door hard. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror and, without me saying anything, asked, "You came from the Holland House, huh?" I nodded, still unable to speak. He nodded back as if he had seen this before. "You had the guts. Almost no one comes back whole from there." And I wanted to forget, but I couldn't. I got home still trembling, my shirt soaked in sweat, and the smell of that house stuck to my skin. I went in without saying anything, straight to my room, and locked myself in. My mom knocked on the door asking if everything was okay, but I just said it was fatigue. How could I explain that? Who would believe me? When I finally lay down, the room darkened to a level where it seemed like the streetlight had vanished. I closed my eyes trying to forget, but every time I blinked I saw those black eyes staring at me again. In the middle of the night I woke up to a sound in the backyard. A dry, deep bark. Chilling. I jumped out of bed but didn't have the courage to look out the window. I froze. "It was just a dog," I repeated, but my body didn't believe it. Since that day, any bark makes me shudder. I cover my head with the blanket like a child, hoping it will pass. Sometimes I smell wet earth coming from nowhere. Other times I hear that growl, like a distant echo but inside my head. I told my mom about it the next morning at breakfast. She laughed, said I should stop watching so many horror videos, but there was a moment when she looked at me more seriously. She asked if by any chance I had opened a door with a strange number. I stayed silent. She turned pale. She stood up from the table without saying another word. And that's why I say, a lot of people believe in ghosts, but real demonic encounters, that only happens to those who go through the wrong door. Disturbing, isn't it? Not everyone makes it out of that house alive. But what about when the threat isn't outside? It's inside your own bedroom night after night. That's exactly what happens in the next story. And hey, before we continue, if you've made it this far, that means you're enjoying these stories. Go ahead and hit that like button so YouTube knows you want more terrifying content like this, and so you don't miss a single tale. The first time I felt something was off about my room, I was around 10 years old. It wasn't some big scare or a scene from a horror movie, just a feeling. You know when you walk into a place and, even though it's empty, it feels like someone's watching you? That's what it was like. Whenever I was alone in there, especially at night, I'd get this weird discomfort, like an invisible presence was standing in a specific corner, silently observing everything. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it just got harder and harder. The house was ordinary, built in the 2000s in a quiet neighborhood. No cursed land, no strange neighbors. My parents, my younger sister, and I lived there for over 15 years. But only my room seemed to have this different energy. Sometimes it felt like the air got heavier in there. There were days when I'd walk in, and the room felt icy, even in the summer. The corner near the wardrobe was the worst. I avoided looking directly at it at night because every time I did, I'd feel a chill run up my spine. For a long time, I thought it was all in my head. I've always loved reading about the paranormal, watching documentaries about haunted houses, and YouTube videos about strange phenomena, so I figured my imagination was playing tricks on me. But then, one day, my sister slept in my room because hers was being renovated. When she woke up, she was pale, her eyes wide. I asked if she was okay, and all she said was, "You feel it too, right? There's something standing in that corner." That stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't told her anything before. She described a tall figure, really tall, standing in the dark, faceless, just a dark shape with a suffocating presence. She said that at one point during the night she felt like she was being watched by eyes that weren't there. It was exactly what I had been feeling for years. After that, I told my mom. I didn't go into too much detail. I just said the room had a bad energy. She got serious, took an old crucifix that had been stored in the dresser drawer, and gave it to me along with a rosary. "Put this in your room, just as a precaution," she said. I wasn't exactly religious, but I accepted anything that could help. But then the nightmares started. Almost every night I dreamed of dark hallways, voices whispering my name, distorted figures following me. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, sometimes even with chest pain, and always with the same feeling. Someone was there with me. Even after waking up, before opening my eyes, I knew. And when I finally faced the room, there was the dark corner, waiting for me. The noises started shortly after. Footsteps, clear, distinct. The sound of someone walking on the carpet. First slow, as if prowling. Then faster, almost running. One night I heard 3 steps in a row and the sound stopped right beside my bed. I froze. I couldn't even turn my head. I felt the heavy breathing of something that shouldn't have been there. I saw nothing, but the presence was almost palpable. I knew I had to do something. Seek help, talk to someone, pray, I don't know. But fear paralyzed me. I had this absurd dread that if I took the first step to confront it, the thing would reveal itself completely, as if it had been waiting for exactly that. It was on one of those nights that I finally saw it. I had woken up from a nightmare, still a bit groggy, when I realized the room was darker than usual. I looked at the corner, and there it was, a huge creature. Its skin looked burned or covered in something dark and sticky. It had twisted horns, its eyes were 2 red slits, and its arms were too long for its body. It just stood there, as if analyzing me. It made no sound, didn't move, but the feeling was so intense that I started crying without realizing it. The next morning, I tried to pretend it had just been another dream, a delusion, until my sister came to have coffee and asked if I'd also dreamed about the thing with horns. On the same night, in the same corner of the room and with the same suffocating feeling. She even described the red eyes and the dark, sticky skin. That's when I realized this was no longer just a supernatural experience. It was real, and worse, it wasn't going away easily. We tried everything. Holy water, coarse salt in the corners of the room. We even had the house blessed. For a couple of weeks, it seemed like the thing had vanished. No nightmares, no noises, no shadow in the corner. But it was just a facade, a forced calm, as if it was waiting for the right moment to return. On the day I moved in with my boyfriend, I thought I had left it all behind. New city, new house, new room. None of that dark corner. No strange objects, no out-of-place sounds. I started sleeping better, breathing in peace. But the peace didn't last long. One night I woke up to find him sitting on the bed, wide awake, staring fixedly at the bedroom door. I asked what was wrong, and he just replied, "There was someone there, tall, standing. I thought it was you." The problem was, I was right beside him, sleeping, and he swore he saw the figure cross the hallway and disappear. The next day, he mentioned strange whispers coming from the wardrobe, as if someone was repeating words in a language he didn't know. That's when I realized it had followed me. The presence wasn't tied to the old house. It was tied to me. Still, I tried to live a normal life. I didn't talk about it anymore, tried to avoid remembering. But every so often the energy would return, and always in the same way. The feeling of being watched, a cold that would suddenly take over the room, the corner darkening even with the light on. And the worst, the dreams came back. But this time they had a terrifying clarity. I'd find myself in a completely dark room, the walls covered in strange symbols, and it was there, the same being as before, but now it was approaching, slowly, with its red eyes glowing in the dark. Sometimes it would whisper my name. Sometimes it would say things I couldn't understand, but they left my heart pounding, as if it were a threat. It was as if this being wanted to take me, or mark me in some way. I went back to visit my parents, thinking that maybe, I don't know, closing a cycle or revisiting the old room would help me understand. And as soon as I set foot there, everything unraveled again. The room was the same, but the feeling was even worse. That presence had never really left, but now it seemed more aware of my return. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the door creaking slowly, as if someone was opening it just enough to watch me. But what really sent me into a panic was the dog. He had always been calm, playful, but that night he just stopped in front of my room, stared into the void and started growling low. Then he barked angrily at an old stuffed toy that had been thrown in the corner, a toy my sister had left there years ago. The dog lunged at the toy as if there was something alive inside it. He tore it apart, destroyed it, and kept staring at what was left as if something was still there. The next morning I told my mom everything. She said that since I'd left, no one had used that room anymore. But every so often, she'd hear noises at night, footsteps, and once she even saw the chandelier swinging on its own. And the detail she mentioned, almost without realizing, made me freeze. Whenever this happened, the room would smell strongly of sulfur. Since then, I've known that no matter where I go, that thing follows me, as if it has made some kind of mark, a bond that I don't know how to break. It's not just a spiritual presence, it's something older, darker, more conscious. And the worst of it all, it doesn't just appear in dark corners anymore. Now it appears behind the mirror, inside the wardrobe, in the reflection of the turned-off TV. And sometimes, even when my eyes are closed. Horrifying, right? What did you think of this one? Give it a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. On that summer night, something in the air already felt off. We were laughing, chatting away, eating greasy popcorn straight from the bag, and waiting for the movie to start. It was 2013, and I was at Matt's place for a sleepover with the neighborhood crew. There were about 5 others there, not counting my nephew, Gus, who was glued to me the whole time, like a shadow. The movie was one of those long, heavy ones with a soundtrack that makes you uncomfortable without knowing why. I don't even remember the name, just that it was about possession, and nobody blinked during the tensest scenes. After a while, the couch started swallowing me up. The others' voices grew distant, their laughter muffled. And before I knew it, I was out, sprawled there awkwardly, the remote still on my stomach. I don't know how much time passed. I just remember suddenly opening my eyes, like someone had snapped their fingers next to my ear. Everything was lit up. The living room lights, the kitchen, even the laundry room. And it was dead silent. No TV noise, no buzzing mosquitoes, nothing. Just silence. The kind that weighs heavy in the air. The first thing I felt was a sense of alert, like when you know something's wrong but can't put your finger on it. I sat up slowly, looking around, trying to see if the others were still there. But I saw no one. I just felt that thing, that presence. Like something was watching me from the corner of the room. I felt goosebumps creeping up my spine, as if icy hands were trailing down my back. And then I saw it. The creature emerged from what should have been the shadow between the bookshelf and the hallway door. It didn't walk. It was just there, like it had formed from the darkness itself. It had the body of a man, but its feet were hooves. Its arms were long and twisted, and its head, the head looked like a goat's, but with human eyes. Fixed, judging. Its skin was a mix of ash and burnt black, as if it had been pulled from the middle of a bonfire. And then, without even moving its lips properly, it started to speak, but something was very wrong. It wasn't English. I didn't understand a word, but somehow, I understood everything. It was like each sound was being pushed into my head, one by one. I didn't know what ancient Aramaic was until that moment, but later, when I looked it up, I recognized the sound. That's what it was speaking, and I responded. My body responded, without me wanting to, without me understanding, without me being able to stop. I started to get up, still half asleep, and followed it to the hallway. It was like my body was a magnet pulled by that energy, a negative, dense, almost sticky energy. I walked, but it felt like I was floating because I couldn't feel my feet. When I reached the bedroom door, the sight almost made me vomit. Everyone was there. The boys, Matt, even my nephew Gus, all dead. Their bodies were twisted, as if they had been forcefully bent. Their eyes were open, their skin colorless, their mouths frozen in a final silent scream. And in the center, a mark on the floor, as if drawn with warm blood. The creature looked at me and smiled, showing too many human teeth for one mouth. That's when I screamed. A scream of pain, of despair, of pure terror. But in the same instant, everything went black. And when I woke up again, I was in the kitchen, holding a knife, a big one, the kind used for carving meat like Matt's mom used for cutting up chicken. My arms were trembling. My face was drenched in sweat, and I had this feeling that, if I had stayed there a second longer, something much worse would have happened. The screams woke everyone up. Matt's mom was the first to appear, scared, asking what was going on. The boys came behind her, yawning and rubbing their eyes. When they saw me like that, pale, holding the knife and crying like a child, the mood shifted instantly. No one understood anything. I could only drop the knife on the floor and collapse, trembling. I told them everything, the movie, the sleep, the presence, the being, the strange language, the bodies, the knife. Matt's mom was very religious, the kind who keeps a Bible open in the living room, a crucifix at the entrance, and anointing oil hidden behind the fridge. She didn't think twice. She grabbed a rosary, started praying aloud, and walked through the house sprinkling holy water everywhere. She said it was the work of evil, that something had entered with us, that we must have opened a door we didn't know how to close, and that it wasn't just a simple nightmare, it was a warning. The rest of the night was sleepless. No one could go back to sleep. The light stayed on until sunrise and everyone was quiet, each with a cup of tea in hand, trying to understand what had happened. I cried. I really cried, like a scared child, because it wasn't just the terror of the vision, it was the feeling that I had lived it. For real. I could still smell the room, the blood, the smoke coming from that creature's skin. It was too vivid to be a dream. After that day, I never had such an intense experience again. I've had lucid dreams before, some nightmares that left me disturbed, but that was different. I spoke in ancient Aramaic. I don't even speak Spanish properly. The feeling was that my mind had been invaded, like someone had tampered with my deepest files and left a trace there. To this day, I can't explain it, but that night never left my mind. Every now and then I wake up in the middle of the night with the same feeling of being watched, that there's someone or something waiting for me to close my eyes again. And look, if one day you feel like the air is too heavy for no reason, like the lights turn on by themselves, or someone calls you in a language you don't understand, don't respond, just pray and run. After everything you've just heard, tell me, how are we supposed to sleep peacefully now? If you've stuck around this long, you already know these stories aren't just jump scares. They stick with you long after they're told. So make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep hearing these unsettling tales that stay in your head for days. Leave a survive till the end in the comments so I know who had the courage to stay with me through the last story. I'll be checking. And hey, if at any point you felt that chill run down your spine, you know what to do. Drop a like on the video. That connection we've got here means a lot. There's another video right here that keeps the dark vibe going. Click on it and come with me over there. Trust me, it's not time to turn the lights off yet.